Video by Emmanuel Isaiah Smith.
Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Friday, December 19th, 2025. The time is 3:50 p.m., and I'm in Miami, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is Fear Narratives Part 2, Scapegoat Cowardice. And ladies and gentlemen, I tend to do these lectures outdoors, and I may raise or project my voice from time to time throughout this lecture to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volumes accordingly, and thank you for listening today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to begin this lecture, as I do so many others, by addressing a number of matters that I feel need to be addressed. The first matter that I would like to address is the capacity of both citizens and officials alike, particularly in this day and age, to have a America Second mentality. Now, the reason I say America Second is in stark contrast to this America First narrative that you sometimes hear throughout the civilized world. There are countries throughout the world, particularly over the past 20 years, who have asserted that throughout its inception, we'll say from its inception, from its creation, the United States as an entity has always put its interests first over and above the interests of the greater global community. Now, quite frankly, who is to say that America, with respect to its sociological identity, is wrong for that? Perhaps America has, particularly over the past 20 years, put its interest above the interest of the greater global community. That is a matter of sovereignty, ladies and gentlemen. The United States is a sovereign territorial entity. Yes, it is beholden to other countries. For example, China, I believe, is a creditor of the United States. I believe the United States owes anywhere from $800 billion to $1 trillion to China. So America is tied to other countries with respect to owing them money. I mean, there's really no way to embellish that. The United States is in debt to other countries, despite its America First political pillar. All right. Now, some countries go into debt with other countries as a show of good faith. So, for example, the United States owes money to several of its allies as a show of good faith. And America's allies at various points in time, particularly over the past we'll say 75 years, have borrowed money from America as an act of good faith. It's not that much different than people who know each other borrowing items from each other, like say cash, or perhaps your friend has a device or a gadget that might benefit you that you might ask to borrow, and then you give it back to them at some point. Perhaps a friend loans you their car for a period of days or what have you if they don't particularly need it, or perhaps they have more than one vehicle and they loan you one while yours is being worked on or something to that effect. It's just something that people who are friendly with each other do from time to time, okay? It's not a necessity. Not everyone who is a friend to another person loans or borrows something from that friend, but it's something that happens from time to time, and it's a show of good faith. It's a show of camaraderie, that you can borrow something from a friend or loan something to a friend and expect it back, and doing so with the strengthening of bonds. You see? So there are countries in this world who are allied with other countries who do things like that for one another. They will loan each other money and pay it back with interest, etc., etc., simply as a way to strengthen ties and to create a sense of political bonding between countries. But when you look at the situation, for example, with China, the United States owes China almost $1 trillion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the United States has never publicly called China a friend. As a matter of fact, the United States has constantly, since the 1960s, found ways to vilify China. All right? And in vilifying China, it has essentially attempted to assert itself over China. Because keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen, China is one of those rare countries in the world that has never been conquered. And the United States, I think, resents China for that, because the United States kind of has this complex where, you know, we can assert superiority over another country by dominating or conquering that country. And if not militarily, then we'll dominate or conquer that country politically, or with sanctions, or with labels, or philosophically. You see, that is sort of the American mindset with respect to foreign diplomacy and foreign relations. It always has to feel the need not only to be better than other countries, but it feels like it needs to conquer them, to show their people and ours, okay, through dominance, that America is better than them. Now, China is one of those countries, one of those rare countries, where you can't quite point to any situation in history where they were actually conquered or dominated. You see, there are a number of countries like that, okay, but there are only a few. Most countries in the world have been conquered or dominated by another country, but China's one of those that hadn't. So the United States sort of has this megalomaniacal fringe envy of China, okay, because of that. And I believe that the United States federal establishment, and particularly some of the more deleterious elements that run the American federal establishment from the backgrounds, look at China and they sort of thumb their nose up like, who does this country think they are, not letting America dominate them? So what we'll do is we'll provoke China, we'll harass China, we'll call China, we'll find names for it like Red China, and we'll force it to sell its TikTok platform, and we'll denounce communism so we can denounce China by proxy. will use the old occasional war drum against China, and will find ways to marginalize China in our news media, and will marginalize China in various political forums, but then we'll turn around and borrow $1 trillion from them. Not because the United States needs $1 trillion from China, but just simply to see if it can get that money from China. And China, being probably per capita, or rather dollar for dollar, the richest country in the world, or the most economically sovereign country in the world, they benevolently gave the United States that money. And my thinking is this: the United States in my opinion, the United States of America has every intention of defaulting on that loan or not paying it back as a show of superiority to China. Now, keep something in mind, ladies and gentlemen. The United States of America could never invade China. Okay? And it's not going to invade China for the same reasons that it'll never invade Iran. It'll never invade Russia. It'll never invade North Korea. It'll never invade any of these countries that it so-called has problems with, and that have so-called boogeyman regimes, and who are so-called threats to the greater good of humanity. The United States ain't going to invade none of those countries, and the reason the United States ain't going to invade none of those countries is because the United States likes easy wars. The United States is that playground bully that goes around beating up kids that are about 2.5 times smaller than it, because it gives it an ego boost. Okay, and you're going to see how I tie this narrative into gang stalking in a minute. Okay, but the United States has constantly used fear narratives against its so-called enemies as a way to bully them. Now, I'm going to let you know something, ladies and gentlemen. If you look back in history, okay, let's not even go back that far. Let's go back to about 1980. Okay? What countries has the United States gone to war with since 1980? The only one I can really picture is Iraq and Afghanistan. Two countries that are considerably poorer than the United States and have considerably less resources than the United States. And what did those wars yield? The Iraq war yielded nothing but oil revenues for American companies. And the Afghanistan war yielded the American military apparatus getting kicked out of Afghanistan by the Taliban. You see? So it's to the point now where the United States can't even invade third world countries anymore and kick them around like it used to. Those days are apparently over. Those days where America could simply jump up, create a false narrative for war, and invade a third world country are over. It's to the point where America's getting its ass kicked by third world countries. You see? So the United States can no longer do that anymore. So like a dog that just got kicked out of somebody's house, they run down the street with their tail in between their legs, looking for somebody else to bully so as to raise the national pride level again, right? So the fear narratives have failed. The fear narratives against China has failed. The fear narratives against Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, all right, Russia, all those fear narratives have failed. And quite frankly, it's to the point where the United States has to attack its own citizens to raise its national pride, right? Listen, ladies and gentlemen, the United States is unique in that regard. It constantly needs someone to attack. You see, that is sort of in the DNA of this country as a sovereign territorial entity. If it doesn't have a third world country to invade, it must find somebody else to attack. So this is where gang stalking comes into play, ladies and gentlemen, right? I've said in many of my discourses that I've seen heightened levels in my own gang stalking campaign over the past 10 years, right? That was 2015. At this particular time in American history, the Iraq War, which was, for all intents and purposes, a total awkward mismanagement and malfeasance of national security information, okay? You had, and essentially all you had left was Afghanistan, and that ended up in a catastrophe as well. With America getting their asses kicked out of Afghanistan by the Taliban. And let me at this time invoke my First Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution to say what I'm saying before someone in the United States federal establishment attempts to create a false narrative about me, your host, and retaliate against me even further. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and right now reassert my First Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. And I would like to also reassert that I am not in any way campaigning for any mainstream attention to this program. Okay? I'm not campaigning for it. If I get mainstream attention to this program, great. Because then the word about clandestine gang stalking will get out quicker. But if I don't, that's perfectly fine. My work has reached the ears of people around the world in various capacities. And people around the world know what it is I'm alleging, how I'm saying it works, why it works, and what the disposition towards the U.S. federal establishment is towards my words. All right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to continue. I invoke my First Amendment right to the U.S. Constitution to say what I'm saying as a sovereign United States citizen. The United States of America is a country that I cannot wait to get the hell out of. And the reason I can't wait to get the hell out of America, and I'm talking permanently too, is because, quite frankly, I think that I, as an inalienable being, meaning a being that has inalienable rights. See, I'm no longer a citizen. Okay, I'm no longer a citizen of the United States. I am now just a being. I'm a human being male. That's all I am in this country. Because my rights have been systematically revoked. I am simply a human being and a male. Because my rights under the Constitution, okay, my civil rights, my civil liberties and freedoms have been effectively revoked by the national security apparatus in this country and the intelligence community in this country. And once this program is finally dismantled, who knows when it'll be? Maybe Congress will come up with a 250-year plan to slowly phase out gang stalking over the next 250 years so that by the year 2275 there'll be no gang stalking. Okay, that's probably what they'll do. But what they'll probably do is say, well, he was on board with this. He was on board with gang stalking. He traded in his constitutional rights for gang stalking, for the ups and downs and left and rights and highs and lows that gang stalking offers him. He traded in his civil rights for that. All right? Bullshit. Okay? Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's what I'm going to do. All right? Because I've already asserted that my rights have been revoked. But I'm still going to assert my First Amendment rights just in case anyone in the U.S. federal establishment or any of its Weasley institutions that actively participate and further the interest of clandestine gang stalking try to use this video as some sort of a rallying cry for why I am advocating for threats of some kind to the U.S. federal establishment or its auxiliaries. So I'm going to once again invoke my First Amendment constitutional rights, even though those have probably been revoked as well. I'm still going to invoke it. The United States constantly needs someone to attack. The United States constantly needs someone to go after. The United States constantly needs someone to vilify. The United States constantly needs to create fear narratives. The United States constantly needs to use its military to play these dirty, hairy games with boogeymen that the U.S. federal establishment creates. I am not campaigning for mainstream attention with these videos. These videos are free and they're open to the public, and they will remain free and open to the public. I do not ask for anything from my viewers but your attention. And what I offer to the general public is a public service. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States constantly needs someone to attack. It is incapable of being diplomatic. And as I said, ladies and gentlemen, if it has no third world countries to invade, when the last third world country has kicked its ass out of their country for decades of meddling and disruption, then they turn on their own people. And that is the nature and character of this country that we call the United States of America. It's disgusting. You understand? Now, ladies and gentlemen, when the dust settles, when the smoke clears, humanity will remain. Let me tell you something about history, ladies and gentlemen. History stops for no country. History continues on through the ages until this world called Earth has taken its final spin. History remains, and time rolls on. History has shown us what happens to evil empires who simply value its own power over the value of a human life. The U.S. federal establishment has a capacity to value its own power over and above the lives of its citizens and its own authority or its own influence over the lives of citizens from other countries around the world. Okay? This country is, with respect to its national security apparatus, and mind you, ladies and gentlemen, the national security apparatus is a euphemism. That means every department and component that makes up the holistic national security apparatus in the United States. Okay? The entire national security apparatus in the United States is little more than a death cult. Do you understand? It is a death cult of like-minded weasels that get together under the guise of national security work and find ways to murder people without consequence. And that murder is not limited to people in other countries. Okay? We don't have to get into what happened in Dresden, Germany. We don't have to get into what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. We don't have to get into what happened in the Koreas. We don't have to get into what happened in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. We don't have to get into what happened in Baghdad, Iraq. And we don't have to get into what happened in the entire country of Afghanistan. We already know what happened in those countries. We have a death cult system of blood for oil and blood for cash, which feeds a corrupt military-industrial complex, which feeds off not only war, but the blood that war produces, so as to generate trillions in taxpayer money to go to this military-industrial complex to go out and fight more wars for more oil, for more blood, and for more taxpayer dollars. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to attempt to do in this lecture, aside from getting into fear narratives, is completely wash my hands of this country. Completely. This country has given a blank check and broad powers to a national security apparatus and an intelligence community that is tantamount to a giant worm. Do you understand? What does a worm do? A worm is the most useless creature on the planet. Why do I compare the United States national security and intelligence apparatus to a giant worm? It's because, like a worm, they don't do anything but lay around and consume. They are not here to further humanity. They're not here to further society. They're not here to further democracy. They're not here to further the Constitution. They're not here to further the greater good of the global community. The national security apparatus and the intelligence apparatus of the United States of America, it lays there and it consumes. It consumes human lives. It consumes taxpayer dollars. It consumes human blood. It consumes human compassion. It consumes human decency. All in the name of the superiority of a few. And all this being done in the name of Jesus Christ. Do you understand? The devastation of humanity by the United States national security apparatus and its intelligence community is done in the name of a Christian deity that sacrificed himself to bring salvation to all. Okay? The United States of America along those lines is guilty of state-sanctioned blasphemy. And I have no problem whatsoever calling it on this, because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, what you have is a giant territorial entity in the Western Hemisphere that sits on the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, that is bordered to the north by Canada and bordered to the south by Mexico, who has absolutely nothing to offer humanity but a giant blood show. This country has nothing to offer humanity in the way of political philosophy. It has nothing to offer humanity in the way of diplomacy. It has nothing to offer humanity in the way of anthropological progress. It has nothing to offer humanity with respect to good governance. It has nothing to offer humanity with respect to setting an example for the rule of law. It has nothing to offer humanity with respect to how to run a democracy. It has nothing to offer humanity with respect to an example of a constitutional republic. The only thing the United States has to offer humanity is news story after news story of failed invasions in the third world countries, borrowing lots of money from its alleged enemies, and attacking its own citizens, not only through economic disenfranchisement and educational disenfranchisement, criminal justice disenfranchisement, employment disenfranchisement, okay, hospital care disenfranchisement. All right, the disenfranchisement of people's thoughts and ideas, the disenfranchisement of people's ideas, and through clandestine gang stalking, the disenfranchisement of people's inalienable rights as well. That is what the United States has to offer the world. A light show of disenfranchisement at home and abroad. Now, when I talk about the United States of America as a sovereign territorial entity, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about it from the perspective of somebody who was administratively kidnapped as a 10-year-old child. Okay? I was placed in this program called clandestine gang stalking at the age of 10, which should not either impress or distress anyone at all. Look at how children are treated in this country anyhow. All right? Maybe the United States could take some of that $2 trillion a year it gives to its military-industrial complex and invest in its children. That way, kids at 10 years old won't get snatched up and placed in clandestine gang stalking campaigns and remain there. All right? America's priorities have always been out of whack. Okay? The United States federal establishment will tell you in press releases and press conferences why the reason we invest so much in our military is because we have enemies around the world that would like to destroy America. Yeah, no shit. Of course you do. You have used every single dime, every political resource, and every single aspect of the United States holistic territorial sovereign entity to plague the lives of people overseas in the name of democracy, in the name of international justice, and in the name of Jesus Christ. What do you think other countries are going to think of you? Of course they're going to want you out of their country. Of course they're not going to want to have anything to do with you. And yeah, they're going to side with your enemies. And quite frankly, you've made an enemy out of me. The sooner I can get the hell out of this country, the better. I'd be just about ready and willing to relocate to Siberia if I had to. Negative 60-degree weather on a daily basis? Hey, send me. As long as I have the resources I need to sustain my life, send me. All right? This country is a blood show. Okay? It selects other countries to run this blood show on, and now it selects its random citizens to run this blood show on. That is all the United States of America is. It is a state-sanctioned, taxpayer-funded, international blood show. And I would like to warn allies and enemies of the United States federal establishment alike to watch this country very closely and don't trust it too much. Okay, because the United States will betray an ally. As a matter of fact, it uses an international conglomerate, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was founded in the United States, to build churches in other countries so it can spy on you and your citizens. And not only spy on you, but tamper with your societies. Okay, yes, the U.S. federal establishment uses that church, which has an international presence in 200 countries, as a spying unit. And any country in the world who has been approached by that church for them to come into your church and do philanthropy and build churches and temples, you do well not to allow them in. Because to allow them in is to allow a United States federal spying unit to build in your church under the guise of religion. Okay? And I would like to applaud and congratulate any country in the entire world who has refused to let that church in. And to all you countries who have let that church come in, I'm not going to say that you've failed your people, because you haven't failed your people. Okay, you haven't failed your people. You can still be good countries. You're just going to have to rout them out or put very tight monitoring clauses in place so that you can make sure that that country is not being used by the United States federal establishment to subvert your judgment and subvert your people and subvert your constitutions. Okay? The United States federal establishment, furthermore, has allowed itself to favor countries like Mexico and Cuba over the interest and well-being of its own countries. All right? And the reason I say Mexico and Cuba is because Mexicans have been infiltrating this country through the southern border with impunity for 53 years now. And Cubans have been infiltrating this country clandestinely through the illegal migration mechanism for about 40 years. So you have a country, a federal establishment in the United States of America who refuses to do anything about this thuggish scourge called clandestine gang stalking, but it continues to let Mexicans and Cubans into this country to act with impunity, not of their own will, but of the will of Mexico and Cuba. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Mexico and Cuba both have covert operations in this country that are made to assist Mexicans and Cubans at the detriment and the expense of the rest of the country. Furthermore, Mexico is a next door neighbor to El Salvador, which is considered the world's most criminal country. And there's no telling how many El Salvadorians are filtering or infiltrating Mexico and then infiltrating the United States and settling here at the taxpayer's dime and to the glee of various governments south of the border. And we all know what's happened with Cuba. Cuba was designated as a terror state this last month by Mike Waltz, the United States ambassador to the United Nations. And do I need to say more? Obviously, the Cuban government has terror cells being operated here in the United States, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the money that's being used to house these persons and finance their activity is coming out of your paychecks. So apparently the United States federal establishment is okay with all this. Me, I've given up on the United States federal establishment, okay? It's arrogant, it's deceitful, it's greedy, it's violent, and it's thuggish. All right? And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm totally disgusted and the federal establishment and its citizens ought to be ashamed of themselves for not staying up on these matters. The typical United States the typical United States citizen will probably say something to the effect of, well, I got a job at a wife or a husband, and as long as I can work that job and feed myself and keep a roof over all our heads, then that's all that matters to me. Maybe that and pleasing my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That's perfectly fine. You can be a slave if you want to be. You can be a slave if you want to be. This country is bigoted. This country is deleterious. This country is a stewie of Cuba and Mexico. And I think it serves this country right that in 2050 you're going to have a Spanish-speaking population. It serves you right. That after just, at that point, it'll be 280 years of history, that your whole demographic makeup is going to change. It serves you right. It serves you right, America, that in 2050, the demographic majority is going to change hands to a people who have proven that they hate the United States of America. It serves you right. And you got what you had coming. You allowed these politicians, particularly at the federal level, to shuck and jive you, to shiest you, to deceive you, and to play you for absolute dummies over and over and over and over and over again until you become essentially a client state of countries that are poorer than you. The United States of America is a client state of Mexico. The United States of America is a client state of Cuba. These countries, despite their terribly high crime rates and their designation as terrorist states, they have managed to conquer and dominate the United States of America through illegal immigration. And your federal establishment is so weak that it could never do anything about it. Do you understand? And you deserve that. You deserve it, America. You deserve it for letting these politicians do you the way they have. You deserve it. And you deserve it for letting churches like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints add to that, because that church is more heavily invested in Latino causes than any other institution on planet Earth. And they're part of the reason that it has been so difficult to seal the border. That church welcomes illegal immigration. Now, I'm not saying the congregation necessarily, but the upper levels of the church, okay, the decision makers of the church welcome illegal immigration because Latinos have an overwhelming capacity to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it has padded its numbers by the millions from baptizing new Hispanic people into the church. And why? Because according to church doctrine, Jesus Christ rose from the dead on the third day and visited Guatemala. Okay, that's the church's doctrine, and Latinos identify with that because that narrative makes Latinos chosen by Christ. And that's how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints treats Latinos. It treats Latinos as having been chosen by Christ. You see? And that's why as the decades roll on here in the United States, you're going to see more and more and more and more Latino interests and causes taking priority and precedence over the causes and political needs of non-Hispanics, because of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has insane political and economic sway over the political landscape of this country. And let's keep something in mind too, ladies and gentlemen. All those Middle Eastern wars, okay, yes, part of it was to protect Israel. You cannot fault the United States for wanting to protect Israel. That's a strategic alliance. I'm not saying that Israel is any better or any worse as a country than any Arab or non-Arab country. But what I'm saying is this. The United States and Israel are allies. So if Israel gets into trouble, the United States comes to its aid. Okay? That's just simply the way it is. Okay? I'm not here to say that's right. I'm not here to say that's wrong. I'm not here to be neutral about it. I'm just stating the facts. Okay? With respect to some of those Middle Eastern wars, I don't doubt for 1 second in my mind that there were elements in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that jumped into the political discussion, threw around cash, threw around narratives, and said, you know what, the United States of America is an instrument of God Almighty and Jesus Christ, and we should use our military in a capacity to thwart the enemies of Israel in accordance to what the Bible says. And at the same time raising money for the military-industrial complex. The end. Okay? I am no longer, as a free sovereign citizen, about to continue to tiptoe through the tulips, as they say, or beat around the bush, or mince words, or bite my tongue about what it is I'm seeing and what it is I'm experiencing. Okay? Gang stalkers use false narratives similarly to how the United States federal establishment uses false narratives. Gang stalkers use fear narratives the same way that the United States federal establishment uses fear narratives. Okay? The U.S. federal government has put my interest and your interest to the back of its priority list and said, hey, you know what? It is what it is. We can't stop illegal immigration from anywhere, so we might as well just accept it and try and make the best of it. And that's the spineless leadership we've been getting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America does not guarantee anything to anybody. Okay? When you're born into this world, the United States federal establishment doesn't even guarantee that your first day at home as an infant will be one that sees you living throughout the day. All right? The U.S. federal establishment does not even guarantee that the hospital you're born into won't be your grave. The U.S. federal establishment does not guarantee that any 10-year-old child walking down the street won't be killed or abducted by some crazed homicidal pedophilic lunatic. The U.S. federal establishment does not even guarantee that you'll be able to ever earn as much as $1 in your entire life. Why? Because all of its resources All of its tax revenues go to one place and one place only, and that's its military-industrial complex, not because we need that much protection, not because we're at constant danger of being invaded, but because it raises executive bonuses and it raises stock revenues for companies that comprise the military-industrial complex. That's it. It's helping out its friends. Okay? It puts a little money into the infrastructure of this country. For some reason, we always have construction projects that we need done. There are hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money going into those. Why? Not necessarily because we need all that construction, but because these congressional representatives are helping out their friends. They have friends in the construction industry. They have friends that own construction companies. And if they can give them $5, $10, hell, $50 million to do a construction project, well, a percentage of that is going to come back to them in campaign donations. But that's just the nature of the beast. But that's also why I could never run for politics. There's actually a bunch of reasons, but we won't get into all of them. Primarily, what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a system of economic and political thuggery that benefits a few at the expense of the many. And I think it's disgusting because we have always called ourselves a democracy and a constitutional republic. I call on the United Nations right now to hold a tribunal to find the United States, because of clandestine gang stalking, guilty of crimes against humanity and guilty of high treason, as it were. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about the fear narratives that the United States federal establishment creates, it's not just fear narratives against other countries, so we'll have a pretext to use the military-industrial complex war machine mechanism to keep ourselves, quote, safe and secure. Gang stalkers use similar fear narratives against persons like myself, who they try to make boogeymen out of, using these monkey doodle undercover operatives, gang stalkers, and liaisons, okay, of many cultural backgrounds as anchors to this constant fear narrative that they're creating on behalf of the U.S. federal establishment and its objectives. And I'm going to say this too, ladies and gentlemen. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that these words out of my mouth today will stand the test of time. Okay? Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, what you have is a set of circumstances, okay, that allow U.S. citizens to band together and conduct themselves like a pack of hyenas, right, against the interests and sovereignty of U.S. citizens across this land. And not only will Congress not acknowledge it, but it seeks to vilify the people that come forward about it as either unpatriotic or psychotic. Why? Because the United States needs blood to operate. If it's not draining or extracting or pulling or shedding the blood of people around the world, then it's going to shed the blood of its own citizens in kind. All it needs is a narrative. And what narrative is better than a fear narrative if you want to harm another person? Call them crazy, call them psychotic, call them antisocial, call them violent, Call them scary. Call them criminally inclined. Call them schizophrenic. Call them whatever you have to keep the federal threat of violence over his head. You need fear narratives in order to run a blood show, like the United States of America has allowed itself to become. Okay? If things were any different, ladies and gentlemen, I, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, will have told you this country is in an absolute total mess. It lies to its people. It lies to other countries. It lies to the populace of other countries. It is absolutely disgusting in its operation. It allows clandestine gang stalking to commence without hindrance. It's a biological boon. It's a terroristic boon. And it is a blasphemous boon because it does all this bloodshed in the name of Christ. All right, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, your interests are not of any more concern to the federal establishment of this country. They have simply accepted that the illegal immigration mechanism has dominated it and conquered it. The United States has been conquered by foreign-speaking persons, and by 2050, you're going to see the result of that conquest. Do you understand? Your federal establishment has betrayed you, and not only has it betrayed you, but it has allowed many of you to become targeted individuals in the process. Not because you deserve to be, but because, as I said earlier, this country needs someone to attack at all times to feed its military-industrial complex. And because there are no third world countries to invade right now, it must attack its own citizens because it likes easy wars. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not campaigning for celebrity status. I'm not campaigning for 100 million views on my Instagram. I'm not campaigning for a mainstream news interview. I am not campaigning for anything but sanity. I'm campaigning for my civil rights. I'm campaigning for my constitutional rights. I'm campaigning for the rights of my significant other, Lori. I'm campaigning for the rights of anyone in this country who has been betrayed by its national security and intelligence apparatus through gang stalking's mechanisms, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, the national security apparatus in this country and its intelligence apparatus have betrayed the United States populace. And furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, I, your host, am a campaigner for honor. I'm a campaigner for honor. I campaign for honor and nothing else. If the U.S. federal establishment does not honor my civil liberties, if the U.S. federal establishment does not honor my civil rights, if the U.S. federal establishment does not honor my constitutional rights, but rather carries on in an ape-like fashion, with respect to the furtherance, the systematic state-sanctioned furtherance of buffoonish behavior, then that is the stain that America is going to leave on the rest of the world. I'm not talking about a legacy. I don't think America has a legacy to speak of. All it has done over the past 100 years is blow up stuff and sacrifice the lives of its own citizens to special interests. That is not a legacy, that's a stain. And when it really comes right down to it, the United States federal establishment is going to leave a stain on the rest of humanity, not a legacy.